Hi, this is Gautam. For today's episode, we're going to look at this book, The India Way, by the External Affairs Minister of India, Mr. Jaishankar. 2 weeks back, I stumbled upon this book in a bookshop, obviously, and this has been in my wish list for quite some time, but I still not did not get it because I have a lot of books to be read in my TBR, and I didn't want to add one more in the pile. But last year was important for India when it comes to foreign policy, especially with reference to our neighbors. With Pakistan, with Bangladesh, and I thought, maybe I should get an account of or an understanding of Indian foreign policy thinking, and that is when I decided, okay, fine, I should get this, and I was able to read it quite fast because the writing was lucid. So that's a very short introduction on why I got this book, and now let's jump into the review. Now, this book was published in 2020, and there is an additional chapter which was added in 2022 after the first and second wave of COVID. Now, to put things in perspective, you have to understand that the book serves as, let's just say, a window to Indian foreign policy thinking, especially for the last decade or so. And to get back to that, you can broadly divide the book into two aspects on what exactly what exactly the author wants to deal about. In the first segment, you have the concept of multi-alignment slowly taking precedence over non-alignment. The External Affairs Minister clearly explains why India should actively engage with different partners in different parts of the world. For example, it's not only necessary that you have to maintain the strategic relationship, long-term relationship which India has with Russia, but he also explains that India has to actively look for partners like United States, like European Union, at the same time maintaining good relations with China, with West Asian countries, with Japan and the ASEAN, and also for African nations. The point is, he states that from now on, or at least in a multipolar world, when you have a lot of players coming into picture in terms of foreign policy, in terms of global diplomatic relations, rather than aligning with one partner, it is important to find multiple partners and to be aggressive in exploiting. And he says that this is different from non-alignment. You can clearly see that he writes non-alignment as a philosophy slowly starts losing its relevance after the disintegration of Soviet Union, that is at the end of Cold War. And in page 22, there was an excellent passage. I'll just read it for you, which kind of sets the tone on how foreign policy is done today. It reads, but international relations is an exercise of both forging convergences and managing divergences. Such dynamic processes will keep evolving while coexisting. At the extremes, they produce allies or create conflicts. But in an interdependent world, most relationships tend to settle down in the middle. Converges, Convergences, even among competing powers, is not unknown. So that kind of sets the tone of how exactly Indian foreign policy is done in the last decade or so. And there are specific chapters which are dedicated to China, Japan, and ASEAN, and also the multilateral framework which extends into the India Pacific. If this was one dimension in which the book was taking you through, there's one chapter specifically dedicated to using Mahabharata as as a kind of metaphor, at the same time as a lesson to guide Indian foreign policy. And there are two, three important aspects which the External Affairs Minister wants to derive from. For example, he takes the example of a situation where Arjuna has to face his own relatives, and then compares it with the concept of fatalism. For example, taking Pakistan as an example, uh, it is a hostile country to India, and since the inception, the entire military state is founded on the hatred towards India. But that does not mean that you cannot have a lot of options. For example, let's take the India's actions post Operation Sindhu. Post the Pahalgam attack, we had a measured, calculated response in the name of Operation Sindhu, and at the same time, Indian both different in an Indian contingent comprising of members from different political parties traveled all over the world to provide evidences and to explain India's stand that India is against any form of terrorism, and to provide evidences that any type of funding which goes into Pakistan, the international organizations and countries should be really careful based on the fact that those funds could be misused. Now, the point is, of course, this book was written much earlier, but the point is, just because you have a hostile neighbor, you can't settle into a kind of fatalism that we can't do much. No, you always try to go for different types of mechanisms or different types of measures which is under your which is on hand. Now, yes, you can provide the counterpoints that Pakistan has moved close to the United States of America. And let me tell you something. It is true that Trump is an agent of history, but what matters is long-term strategy and policy. Maybe based on the present presidentship which you have in the United States of America, maybe they have a cordial relation with Pakistan for now. But remember that Trump presidency is going to continue only for 3 years, and if presidency changes, if if the same acts of terrorism which are being sponsored by Pakistan continue, they'll naturally tend to have a broader effect spilling over, not just to India but also to many other countries, and USA will be affected. So the point being, coming back to the same discussion, whatever be the situation, you always strive for other options. Possibly India will work on that same line, considering the hostility which we see in Bangladesh also. We'll have to wait and see. Just trying to say that, trying to explain the thinking behind the process. And secondly, there were ideas on, if you take Mahabharata again, there are situations where even Yudhishthira has to break his vow of not speaking a lie. He has to break the rules to, for example, in that specific instant, to kill Dronacharya, because there was no other way. He's too powerful and he cannot be taken down in an ethical way. So he says that it's not necessary that you have to always play by the rules all the time, and even Indian epics support those kind of ideas. Again, it's not that you should not be using ethical methods, but it's not completely incorrect to use unethical methods if the opposition or if the hostile neighbor is resorting to unethical means. That's what is actually propounded in that theme from Mahabharata, and then applying it to Indian strategic and tactical thinking. And at the same time, there was the mention of the importance of small powers also. Even though small powers may not have enough muscle to really push hard powers, at the end of the day, small powers as in smaller nations can distract a big power from larger goals and larger stakes. So you can apply that to the India's neighborhood again. At the same time, even for global diplomatic affairs. Now, if you're going to ask me, was there any complaint in the book? Again, let me tell you, it is not a book on history. It's not a book on to explain about each and every nitty gritty details on the past of India's foreign policy or present foreign policy. Even the present foreign policy, you don't have a lot of specifics on how exactly this decision is made. That's not the idea. The book serves as a guide or a framework or a window to the foreign policy thinking which we have today. If you're reading this book in that instance, with that in mind, then I don't think you'll be disappointed. But if you're expecting, a greater level of specificity and exact sequence of events on how exactly a decision A leads to consequence B, then based on consequence B, how do you have decision C? Then maybe there are chances that you might get disappointed. That is why now I'm able to recall that when this book was published and it was released in 2020, 2022, there were bipolar reviews. But you should understand that the book takes a neutral standpoint. Even though he is a member of the ruling party presently, when the author writes, he doesn't overly criticize, or he doesn't, he's not too critical of the past. He understands that based on the circumstances, each decision was taken by the circumstances and the situation back then, and he appreciates that that for a particular instant, maybe for 1960s, India had a war with Pakistan, India had the aggression from China, and the 1971 the war with Bangladesh, and 1990s where we go for the second nuclear test, and then the Indo-US nuclear deal. So he appreciates that over a point of time, Indian foreign policy has evolved. So that neutrality is present in that book. And there is a chapter, on the dogmas of Delhi. saying that to break the convention of non-alignment and move towards multi-alignment is pretty difficult because India seems to have boxed itself into a certain type of foreign policy thinking, and you have to be more engaging and active instead of being passive. So that's what he tries to drive through. So my recommendation would be definitely read this book because one way or the other, even if it's not too specific, it's not too sequential. At the end of the day, he's still part of the policy making arena, and I think there are limits to how much you can pen down on on a sheet of paper. So because there are restrictions, right? So whatever be it, it was a good book to read, and the writing's lucid. It's I'm pretty sure you can finish it in a week or so, even if you're working or studying. So that's it for today's review. Meet you with the next episode pretty soon, and when I mean pretty soon this time. Bye for now.